Welcome to Trinity Place. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is a reflection for the fourth Sunday of Epiphany. I'm going to read you the two readings upon which these readings are more or less a reflection of, in case you're not watching this as part of our worship video. The first reading is from the prophet Micah, chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. Starts out sounding very innocent. We'll see later that it's not. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and tens of thousands of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He's told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? That's first reading. The second one is a poem called My Mother's God by Jeff Page. And it goes like this. My mother's God has written the best of the Protestant proverbs. You make the bed, you lie in it. God helps him who helps himself. He tends to shy away from churches, is more to be found in phone calls to daughters or rain clouds over rusty grass. The Catholics have got him entirely wrong. Too much waving the arms about, the incense and caftan, the rainbow light. He's leaner than that, lean as a pair of grocer's scales. Hard as a hammer at cattle sales, the third and final time of asking. His face is most clear in a scrubbed wooden table or deep in the shine of a Laminex bench. He's also observed at weddings and funerals by strict invitation, not knowing quite which side to sit on. His second book, my mother says, is often now too well received. The first is where the center is, tooth for claw and eye for tooth, whoever tried the other cheek. Well, Christ maybe, but that's another story. God, like her, by dint of coursework, has a further degree and predestination. Immortal, omniscient, no doubt of that. He nevertheless keeps regular hours and wipes his feet clean on the mat. It's not to be seen at 3 a.m. His portrait done in a vigorous charcoal is fixed on the inner curve of her forehead. Omnipotent there, in broad black strokes, he does not move. It's not easy, she'd confess, to be my mother's God. And then the other reading is Matthew 5, 1 through 12, the so-called Sermon on the Mount. I'm not going to talk about that specifically too much, but it is auspicious that today, which is here at Trinity Place, our annual meeting, we've been given to us this Micah and the Matthew and poem. That poem that is painful yet brilliant about what we are capable of doing to the gemstones of our spiritual tradition. Gemstones like that reading from Micah and from Matthew. It evokes that not so distant, lean, spare, and brutally scrubbed clean God of our Protestant ancestors, whose love seems really, from this perspective in the 21st century, an abusive kind of love. At first blush, Micah's God could seem like that Puritan God too, the Puritan God of bleached surfaces and brittle temperament. But Micah's God oozes love and hope for all of us. I know that we've been around this track before, if you've been visiting here with Trinity Place for any time at all, or on Subversive Preacher, about the relationship between Micah and Jesus. It comes up at least once every 3 years in the lectionary, but it's worth being reminded of today. Micah was born and raised among rural villages and farmlands in Judah, some 800 years before Jesus. Micah and his family were among the peasant class upon whom was inflicted brutal taxes to support the excesses of the Jerusalem decadent urban elite, as they might be called today. His rustic and lowly social status was like that of the prophet Amos, while Isaiah and Jeremiah came from a more educated class. Now, our buddy Jesus, he shared the same socioeconomic profile as Micah and Amos 800 years later. The prophet Micah insisted that the leadership of the people, those at the helm of its stewardship, should refocus on the covenant, on its 613 laws. Micah reminded those who were in charge that the laws of Torah, those 613 boring rules, included a long list of social entitlements that also reveal the love of God. He reminded the powerful that those entitlements were not being properly executed by them. Those 613 laws spelled out in scrupulous detail that food was to be shared, that there was to be a periodic cancellation of debt, that there was to be a policy of fair distribution of the land, that war was to be waged with mercy where possible, and with a fair number of exemptions respecting the personal lives of soldiers, and that access to power and resources was to be expansive, not narrow, was to be inclusive, not exclusive. Remember, this was a society of former slaves, and they had high expectations for something different than where they came from. Micah reminded them that those boring laws in Deuteronomy and Leviticus were never read, that are never read by us, formed the very heart of the covenant that God had made with Israel. And in order for Israel to be Israel, those laws were to be embodied in the policy and the actions of its ruling class. Micah reminded his partners in covenant that being the people of God is not an entitlement itself. Rather, it's a relationship to be lived into, a covenant based upon a particular kind of social order. What Micah was doing was putting Israel on trial. Literally. He was making the case for the prosecution and putting his contemporaries on trial. It's a courtroom drama, sort of like To Kill a Mockingbird. In the piece of the scene that I just read a little bit ago, which, by the way, was shortened from the lectionary assignment, we are treated to a cosmic version of Law and Order. Micah imagines a courtroom of law in which the powerful elite of his day are the defendants, whose very use of power is used as evidence against them. It's a cosmic court, and at the bench is a tribunal of gods with the God of Israel presiding. It's a cinematic biblical moment in which God calls upon the mountains and the oceans and all the company of heaven to act as witnesses against Israel. The accusation is that Israel has been unfaithful. The charge is that Israel has forgotten her origins. The prosecution asserts that Israel has forgotten that she was once in slavery. And because she has forgotten, she has lost her reason to exist, which was to be a light to people who sat in darkness. Micah's poetry, a poetic prophecy really, includes a feeble defense put forth by the elite as they make a pitiful acknowledgement, sort of their guilt. Remember I read this? So what must we sacrifice to make things right? It's a kind of a whine, really. Should it be something really big this time? What is it you want? Calves? Rivers of oil? How about our firstborn children? Yeah, that's pretty big, huh? We'll throw in some extra prayers, lots of Hail Marys and recitations of the Nicene Creed, earnest confessions, and communion. That last is my little contemporizing. It is a kind of adolescent maneuvering aimed at evoking sympathy from the gods, but which does not actually accept responsibility or accountability. It's obvious that the rich and the powerful of Micah's day neither accept responsibility for the vast disparity of wealth and power, nor do they buy into the covenant and its vision of a more equitable social order. In fact, the very suggestion that God is looking for some kind of religious ritual to make things right is itself a painful indictment that they have forgotten where they came from. And they've forgotten what their mission is. And what Micah keeps saying in as many ways as he possibly can is that we are to remember where we came from and what our mission is. The cosmic court answers their forgetfulness, and it responds to their outrageous attempt to bribe the court with silly rituals. What God requires, the justices declare, is for you to do justice, for you to love kindness, for you to walk humbly with your God. Now I'm convinced that the prophet Micah was Jesus' go-to guy. Underneath Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and especially the summary of the law, is Micah's summation of the covenant. Do not forget where you came from, and do not forget what your mission is. It is to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. I dare say that is as clear and cogent a summation of the covenant for us as it was for either Micah's or Jesus' day. Do not forget where we came from. Do not forget what our mission is. It is to do justice. It is to love kindness. It is to walk humbly with God. Now, in the past, I've broken that down and gone into quite a bit of detail about each of those injunctions and their biblical roots. But I don't think that's necessary today. I think that you can apply these criteria as directly to our social policies and economic lifestyles as I can. We don't need biblical definitions to tell us what they mean. We need courage. We need courage to judge a whole bunch of things that seem far beyond our control. We need courage to apply the covenant as a filter through Micah or Jesus. We need the courage to apply the covenant filtered through Micah and Jesus to our situation and life in the United States of America in the 21st century. We need courage to allow it to alter what we do. We don't get a pass simply because we're just one person or just one family and that we are far away from the power and influence in Albany or Washington, D.C. or Wall Street. So we need courage to consider how we can be better, more effective, more brave in the ways that we do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God. If we do that, if we use Micah and Jesus to ask ourselves hard questions and use their criteria to shape our actions, then we will have remembered where we came from and what our mission is. And we don't get to be perfect. We don't have to crawl on our bellies and sacrifice something at a shrine. We do not have to live in fear of our mother's God that peers down at us with a nasty look and snarled lips because we aren't living up to expectations. All we have to do is remember where we came from and what our mission is, and then go about doing it a little bit at a time, one step at a time, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one opportunity at a time. When we mess up, which we will, and when we get negligent, which we do, then we remember. We remember, and we remember, and we remember, and we walk into our mission one step at a time. And that, my friends, is how I would sum up what church is. A community to help us remember where we came from and what our mission is: to do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with God. A community to help us remember, a community to hold us up and give us courage, a community to love us when we fail and help us to recover. In other words, a community that tries to act like God. So be it. Amen. Amen. And peace be with you. Come on back next week.